Youth and Sunday. And our guest this morning on First, Last, Everything is Thurston Moore, who we'll be chatting to when you've heard these introductory jingles. Or jingle.
Or just one, yeah.
Yeah, there's only one. First, Last, Everything is the part of the show where we ask our guests about what they're up to and also the early, recent and all-consuming musical enthusiasms. And as I say, delighted to welcome to the show this morning Thurston Moore. Good morning, Thurston.
Good morning. How are you?
We're okay, thank you. I'm just looking at a picture of your band from 1979, the Coachmen. You were tall, weren't you, that group?
We were all tall. That was our thing. That was our gimmick.
You look like you're from Venus or something. Yeah. You look. Yeah, Sonic Life, Thurston Moore. It's an epic memoir. It must have taken a while, Thurston.
Well, it took most of that, that pandemic year we had. I kind of just put the sheet over my head and started typing away. It was, made something beneficial out of that year.
There's a lot of detail. Have you got a good memory for stuff?
Well, I kept every flyer and every, fanzine and newspaper article. And so I was a hoarder. So I had boxes of that stuff. So I just unloaded it and went through and put it in chronological order. And, I talked to people, to jar my memory a bit. I tried to go to libraries, but most of the libraries were closed that year. Of course. When they finally opened, though, it was great. I went to the British Public Library and I was able to go through all the hard copies of Sounds and Enemy and Melody Makers.
Oh, great! Wow,
great. Of course, for many years you've been writing music and lyrics. But how was writing prose compared to that?
Oh, well, prose doesn't necessarily have to have a rhyming scheme to fit into the music. It's funny with lyrics because I read this piece once about Bob Dylan publishing his lyrics ahead of Blonde on Blonde in Esquire magazine, and how this writer was talking about how they kind of read kind of corny, but when they were in the context of the music, they actually sounded really profound. And so in a way, music sort of empowers writing sometimes that maybe doesn't stand alone so much, but prose itself needs to stand alone on its own energy. So I think that's the distinction I always sort of look at when I think about the difference between those two.
On the first page of the book, there's an electrifying encounter with Louie when you're very small, but the first thing you've chosen for a year that comes into your life that you own is Citadel by the Rolling Stones. Tell us about the impact of this.
Well, I kind of really wanted to buy a record album. I was really young, and I was with my mother, and she said, "Oh, I'll buy you a record album."
Where was this, Thurston?
Oh my God, this is like 69, 70, 71.
And where were you?
I was in a small town in rural Connecticut, in New England, in the USA, and I picked out this record that had a 3D cover on it.
Yes, it did.
And I wasn't quite sure what it was. And I didn't have my big brother to tell me what it was. And I said, this looks very cool. And my mother said, who is it? And I was like, it's this group. They're really good. I wasn't quite sure. I thought it might be the Rolling Stones. And so I brought it home, and that record scared me. I thought it was a very spooky record. Isn't there a song on there with a crying baby at the beginning? I think it's Gompers.
Oh, right. Yeah.
But Citadel, that was a song that just had this kind of majestic, just really mysterious rock and roll vibe to it that I always adored.
Okay. Yeah. Let's hear a little bit of it.
Citadel by the Stones. Talking to Thurston Moore about his book Sonic Life. A lot of my favourite music, Thurston, comes out of that sort of New York CBGB no-wave scene. You were there, and you got descriptions of the Bowery and Little Italy and Basquiat and Glenn Branca and Patty and Television and Blondie. But you described New York at that time as being, quote, at the bottom of its nosedive. So what was it like being there at that time?
Well, fiscally, the city was pretty bereft.
Yeah,
and so it was kind of the last period where it really allowed young people to come in and live as artists and musicians, etc. these were vocations that didn't really exact too much revenue in people's lives.
I mean, you were living so basically, weren't you? I mean, when you go to Kim's place and in her flat, she's got a mattress, a guitar, and a plank across the bathtub as a table.
That's pretty much what anybody had.
Yeah.
in our scene, so it wasn't really odd. But we all kind of supported each other. I mean, a good friend of mine once said we all moved to the same neighborhood so we could dream together, and I always thought that was
nice.
That's a romantic way of looking at it. But yeah, it was hard bitten. But when you're so young, you can live on a hot dog and a milkshake every day and sort of get through the day, and if you're lucky to even have that, and so. I think we look at our past in our youth with rose-tinted glasses sometimes, but there's a lot of anxiety there, thinking how you're going to get from one day to the next. But you're so young, you don't think about yourself having any kind of shelf life.
And you were clearly a driven youth in the sense of that music was an all-consuming passion.
That's all I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be on stage on CBGB's playing in a band, and that was all I had. That's all I still want to do.
Yeah. Tell us about, that leads us on to a current enthusiasm. Tell us about Devon Ross.
Devon Ross is this wonderful young musician. I met her, she was an actress in a HBO television show called Irma Vep, The Serial, and I did music for her. And so I met her at a screening of that. And she mentioned that she had a band and she was doing music, which a lot of people do, and they send me their files or their tapes or their CDRs or whatever. And sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. This one was great. It was the music on it was so great that we at Daydream Library Series, my wife Eva and I decided to put it out as a 12-inch record. So it's just coming out, and I think she's wonderful. She's playing a gig at the 100 Club on December 13th, and my band is also going to play. And so I'll see her live for the first time. But what I've heard is fantastic.
Okay. Well, we're going to hear a little bit of Killer.
Take it back a little more. Dye your hair, not now. Flip the curse around.
Devon Ross and Killer, recent enthusiasm of our guest Thurston Moore. Obviously, Sonic Youth's oeuvre, there's a lot of noise involved in that. In the book, you obviously play with Glenn Branca and you put on this noise fest in New York and everything. I mean, because of that, not all audiences get it. I quite like the fact that you go down badly quite a lot throughout this book, especially supporting Neil Young. And I very much enjoyed the account of the acoustic Sonic Youth, which doesn't go very well, does it? But, early reviews weren't kind, were they? It was at one point in the book you say it was called dentist drill music.
Dentist drill drone music, which we used as a pull quote because we thought it actually sounded pretty cool. But it was derogatory. But I thought wow, that sounds. I'd actually like to hear dentist drill drone music myself.
Well,
one man's poison, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Your daughter Coco says noise is only good if you're the one making it.
Which is incredibly true. I could have out of the mouth of babes.
Was there a moment, though, when you realised things were starting to change? And, I mean, was there a moment when you realised, I mean, the English press welcomed you after a while, didn't they?
Well, we got a lot of critical accord. I mean, we were very serious about what we were doing musically and not thinking we were just making noise or anything, but we saw noise as really elemental to what we loved about rock and roll. And so I suppose we kind of fetishized it a bit, but at the same token, we were trying to make the best music we could make. And so a lot of people responded to it, but we knew that it was never going to be chart friendly. So there you go.
Although you did finish up with major record deals and everything. I mean, the other thing that struck me reading the book, we talked about New York and how the New York was a very different thing. And yes, it was dangerous and it was edgy, but you could afford to be there and create. And when you were talking about Europe, there were some, people I knew personally as well, Richard Boone, Scott Peering, these people. But the touring and gigs seemed to be a network of friends and acquaintances and sleeping on people's couches rather than promoters and professionals. So is that still the same, or has that changed beyond recognition?
No, it's very much the same. In fact, Richard Boone is still a dear friend of mine.
Yeah,
and I love going to see him in the wilds of Stoke Newington when I can. But yes, to me, it was all about this kind of gang, this kind of micro community of people. We all find each other in the same venues and the same record stores and secondhand bookstores and in these places that not everybody finds to be so incredible as we do. And it's places where the underpinnings of art are happening. The subculture. And to me, that I found that was my home. And it's like there's no place like home. And so I don't have any agenda to rising above the station of that at all. To me, it's like that's where I love to be. And those are the people that you meet on the road, who are in the same ball game as you. Some of them remain friends forever, and that's your community, and it's this global community, and it's all about trying to give people an alternative to some of the horrors that we deal with in our realities.
As well as being a personal memoir, I mean, it acts as a history of alternative rock. Sonic Life acts as a sort of history of alternative rock, particularly American alternative rock, of the last few decades. But you live in England now. Have you become an adopted Englishman?
I will always be somewhat of an alien, a visitor, obviously, but I love England, and I think Nick Cave said somewhere in an interview where living in Brighton was just like he had to drop his anchor somewhere, and I sort of think about it that way. It's like it could be anywhere, but I'm glad it's England because I've been here for over a decade, and I truly cherish it. I think there's such a great old soul here that you only can really feel if you actually spend a lot of time here. So visiting here in the 80s on tour, coming through and in and out. Somebody told me like in 30 years' time you'd be living here. I thought they would be crazy, but here I am, and I just like it's always a place that I feel like I want to explore because I glean so much like just great like benefit from it. It's like there's a certain humanitarian kind of everybody's looking out for each other here. Even though I think there's of course it's easy to sort of people start swinging at each other too because we may agree to disagree sometimes. But at the same time, I think it's a very friendly country in that, underneath it all.
Well, we're glad you find it that way.
Yeah, Sonic Life, a memoir. Sonic Life, a memoir by Thurston Moore is available through Faber. I'm just thinking, run once by another great Anglo-American, T.S. Eliot. Faber, the imprint, and it's available now. Tell us about your lasting enthusiasm for the Stooges and Iggy.
Oh, well, my God. I mean, the Stooges were like the text of rock and roll for me. They were such a mysterious band because I could never hear them. I would see a picture once in a while of like Iggy Pop, the singer, standing on the hands of the audience, like with silver lame gloves on and his hair spray painted silver pointing at the sky. I was like, who is that? And what does that sound like? And it impossible to find the records. And so when I finally did, it just kind of scorched my brain. And then, so, I mean, all three of those first records, Stooges, Funhouse, and Raw Power, those are like, at the time they sold nothing, but in through the years, in the history of rock and roll, they become sort of the three most important documents, as important as anything by the Beatles or Led Zeppelin.
It's like the Velvet Underground story, isn't it? No one bought the albums, but everybody did it and formed a band.
That's true, yeah. So they were way ahead of their time on this, and so there were templates for punk rock, which punk rock is still kind of, punk rock is king.
We'll finish with Search and Destroy then, and Sonic Life, a memoir is available now by Thurston Moore. Thank you for sharing these with us, Thurston.
Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Great to talk to you. Thank you.
Getting quite head up there on his old leather cakes. Iggy Pop, Stooges, Search and Destroy, and enthusiasm, the most all-consuming enthusiasm of our guest today, Thurston Moore. Thank you very much, Thurston.